Surprised, are you? How about you, Nana? Do you like it? I asked her. Nana Mama sighed very softly. She put down her teacup with a clink. Tell you what now. I don't know the clinical terms for these things, Alex, but you never seemed to get over losing your mother. I saw that when you were a little boy. I think I still see it sometimes. It's called post-traumatic stress syndrome, I said to Nana, if you're interested in the name. Nana smiled at my retreat into jargon. She'd seen that act before. I would never make any judgments about what happened to you, but it's affected you since you arrived here in Washington. I also noticed that you didn't always fit in with the crowd, not the way some kids do. You played sports, and you shoplifted with your friend Samson, and you were always tough. But you read books, and you were moderately sensitive. You follow me? Maybe you got tough on the outside, but not on the inside. I didn't always buy into Nana's conclusions anymore, but her raw observations were still pretty good. I hadn't exactly fit in as a boy in Southeast D.C., but I knew I'd gotten a lot better at it. I was accepted okay now. Detective Dr. Cross. I didn't want to hurt you or disappoint you with this. I returned to the subject of the tabloid story. I'm not disappointed in you, my grandmother said to me. You are my pride, Alex. You bring me tremendous happiness almost every day of my life. When I see you with the kids, and see the work you do here in this neighborhood, and know that you still care enough to humor an old woman. That last one is a chore, I told her. About the so-called news story, though. It's going to be impossible for a week or so, then nobody will care very much. Nana shook her head. Her little white helmet of hair turned neatly in place. No, people will care. Some people will remember this for the rest of your life. What's that saying? If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. I asked her, what was the crime? Nana used the back of her knife to clear away toast crumbs. You'll have to tell me that yourself. Why are you and Jessie Flanagan sneaking around if everything is above board? If you love her, you love her. Do you love her, Alex? I didn't answer Nana right away. Of course I loved Jessie. But how much? And where was it going? Did it have to be going somewhere? I don't know for sure. At least not in the way I think you're asking the question, I finally said. That's what we're trying to find out now. We both know the consequences of what we're doing. If you love her for sure, Alex, my grandmother said to me, then I love her. I love you, Alex. You just paint on a very large canvas. Sometimes you're too bright for your own good, and you can be very peculiar by the ways of the white world. And that's why you like me so much, I said to her. She said, it's just one of the reasons, sonny boy. My grandmother and I held each other for a long moment at the breakfast table that morning. I am big and strong. Nana is tiny, frail, but just as strong. It seemed like old times, in the sense that you never really grow up completely. Not around your parents or grandparents. Not around Nana Mama, certainly. Thank you, old woman, I said to her. And proud of it. As usual, she had the last word. I called Jessie a few times that morning, but she wasn't home, or she wasn't answering her phone. Her answering machine wasn't on either. I thought about our night in Arlington. She'd been so wired, even before the National Star had arrived on the scene. I thought about driving over to her apartment, but I changed my mind. We didn't need any more tabloid photographs or news stories while the trial was winding down. Nobody said much to me at work that day. If I'd had any doubts before, that showed me how serious the damage was. I'd taken a hit, all right. I went to my office and sat there all alone with a container of black coffee and stared at the four walls. They were covered with clues from the kidnapping. I was starting to feel guilty and rebellious and angry. I wanted to punch glass, which I'd actually done once or twice after Maria was shot. I was at my government-issue gunmetal desk, facing away from the door. I'd been staring at my work schedule for the week, but I wasn't really seeing anything written on the sheet. "You're in this one all alone, motherfucker," I heard Sampson say at my back. "You're all by your lonesome this time. You are meat cooked on a barbecue spit." "Don't you think you're understating things a little?" I said without turning to him. "I figured you'd talk when you wanted to talk about it," Sampson said. "You knew that I knew about the two of you." A couple of coffee cup rings on the work schedules held my eye. The Browning effect? What the hell was that? My memory and everything else were deserting me lately. I finally turned around and faced him. He was decked out in leather pants, an old Kangol hat, a black nylon vest. His dark glasses were an effective mask. Actually, he was trying to be charming and soft-hearted. "What do you figure is going on now?" I asked him. "What are they saying?" "Nobody's real happy about the way the holy shit kidnapping case has gone down. Not enough attaboys coming down from upstairs. I guess they're lining up potential sacrificial lambs. You're one of them for sure." "And Jessie?" I asked. But I already knew the answer. "She's one too. Associating with known Negroes," Sampson said. "I take it you haven't heard the news?" "Heard what news?" Sampson let out a short burst of breath. Then he gave me the latest heartbreaking story. "She took a leave of absence, or maybe she left the service altogether. Happened about an hour ago, Alex. Nobody knows for sure if she jumped or was pushed." I called Jessie's office immediately. The secretary said that she was gone for the day. I called Jessie's apartment. No answer there. I drove to her apartment, breaking a couple of speeding laws on the way. Derek McGinty was talking over WAMU radio. I like the sound of Derek's voice, even if I'm not listening to the words. Nobody was home at Jessie's. At least no photographers were lurking around. I thought about driving down to her lake cottage. I called North Carolina from a payphone down the street. The local operator told me the number had been disconnected. "How recently was that?" I asked with surprise in my voice. "I called that number last night." "Just this morning," the operator told me. "The local number was disconnected this very morning." Jessie had disappeared. Chapter 66. The verdict in the Senigi Murphy trial was coming down soon. The jury went out on the 11th of November. They returned after 3 days amid nonstop rumors that they had been unable to decide either the guilt or the innocence of the defendant. The whole world seemed to be waiting. Sampson picked me up that morning and we rode to the courthouse together. The weather had turned warm after a brief cool spell that foreshadowed winter. As we approached Indiana Avenue, I thought about Jessie. I hadn't seen her in over a week. I wondered if she would show up in court for the verdict. She'd called me. She told me she was down in North Carolina. That was all she'd really said. I was a loner again, and I didn't like it. I didn't see Jessie outside the courthouse, but Anthony Nathan was climbing out of a silver Mercedes stretch. This was his big moment. Reporters climbed all over Nathan. They were like city birds on stale breadcrumbs. The TV and print people tried to grab a little piece of me and Sampson before we could escape up the courthouse steps. Neither of us was too excited about being interviewed again. Dr. Cross! Dr. Cross, please!" one of them called out. I recognized the shrill voice. It belonged to a local TV news anchorwoman. We had to stop. They were behind us and up ahead. Sampson hummed a little Martha and the Vandellas. Nowhere to run. "Dr. Cross, do you feel that your testimony might actually help to get Gary Murphy off the hook for murder one? That you may have inadvertently helped him to get away with murder?" Something finally snapped inside me. "We're just happy to be in the Super Bowl," I said straight-faced into the glare of several minicam lenses. "Alex Cross is going to concentrate on his game. The rest will take care of itself. Alex Cross just thanks Almighty God for the opportunity to play at this level." I leaned in toward the reporter who'd asked the question. "You understand what I'm saying? You're clear now?" Sampson smiled and said, "As for me, I'm still open for lucrative endorsements in the sneaker and soft drink categories." Then we continued up the steep stone steps and into the federal courthouse. As Sampson and I entered the cavernous federal courthouse lobby, the noise level might have done real damage to our eardrums. Everyone was pushing and milling about, but in a sort of civilized manner, the way folks in evening wear push into your back at the Kennedy Center. Saniji Murphy wasn't the first criminal trial where multiple personality was the center of the defense. It was by far the most celebrated case, though. It had raised emotional questions about guilt and innocence, and those questions genuinely left the verdict in doubt. If Gary Murphy was innocent, how could he be convicted of kidnapping and murder? His lawyer had planted that question in all of our minds. I saw Nathan again upstairs. He had accomplished everything he'd hoped for with his courtroom session. Clearly, there are two personalities battling each other inside the defendant's mind, he told the juries during his summation. One of them is as innocent as you are. You cannot convict Gary Murphy of kidnapping or murder. Gary Murphy is a good man. Gary Murphy is a husband and a father. Gary Murphy is innocent. It was a difficult problem and dilemma for the jurors. Was Gary Saniji Murphy a brilliant and evil sociopath? Was he aware and in control of his actions? Had there been an accomplice to the kidnapping and at least one child murder? Or had he acted alone from the beginning? No one knew the truth, except maybe Gary himself. Not the psychology experts, not the police, not the press, and not me. Now, how would the jury of Gary's peers decide? The first real event of the morning occurred when Gary was escorted into the packed, noisy courtroom. He looked his usual clean-cut and characteristically boyish self in a plain blue suit. He looked as if he worked in some small-town bank, not like someone on trial for kidnapping and murder. There was a smattering of applause. It proved that even kidnappers can have a cult following these days. The trial had definitely attracted its share of weirdos and sick creeps. "Who says America doesn't have any more heroes?" Sampson said to me. "They like his crazy ass. You can see it in their shiny, beady little eyes. He's the new and improved Charlie Manson. Instead of a berserk hippie, a berserk yuppie." "The son of Lindbergh," I reminded Sampson. I wonder if this is how he wanted it to turn out, all part of his master plan for fame? The jury filed into the courtroom. The men and women looked dazed and unbearably tense. What had they decided? Probably very late the night before. One of the jurors stumbled as they moved one by one into the dark mahogany jury box. The man went down on one knee, and the procession behind him stopped. That one brief moment seemed to underscore the frailty and humanity of the whole